difficulties that seems to be a theme on the show, but we're trying to work that out. Chris, you were talking about the one of the transparency acts that they're trying to push through the state legislature. So keep going with that.
Yeah, so live streaming these public meetings, like I said, from state agencies to small town councils. What does this mean for accountability sake, citizen engagement? And like it came up, and I mean, first thing I thought was, okay, like maybe some of these guys will think before they run for office, knowing that their meetings are going to be
Hmm.
streamed. Everything they're doing and saying behind these closed doors is going to be streamed. Because let's face it, most of this stuff, I mean, don't get me wrong, they can go still sit at the bar and have these conversations and discuss this. But at least, it might just make them think twice before they run for office.
Right.
Um, but it's Senate Bill 2259, known as the People's Access Act, sponsored by Senator Tyler McCann, the committee chair and co-authored by Senators Burt Williams and Nicole Boyd. It would mandate that official meetings of state and local public bodies be live streamed via video, with agendas, documents, all that stuff accessible online. And the videos have to appear on the public body's website's homepage, and then also be shared with the Department of Finance and Administration. Some of the exceptions include executive sessions. So it's like, well, we'll just take it to executive session where, then it'd be exempt. Or any lawfully closed meetings would remain exempt as well. So the compliance for this is cities by January 1 of 2027, towns by July 1 of 2027. And then the only other, exemption here would be if there's technical glitches, then it would allow an upload instead of a live stream. But I think a
Mhm.
broader impact of this, it kind of aims to boost the transparency and some of the accessibility that people have to these meetings, especially for people that aren't close to the area. So, if you're far away from somewhere, you can still look back and see what's going on. The Senate already streamed its committees and floor sessions, but the House does not for committees. Similar bills have been passed in the Senate before, but faced the House opposition.
Hmm.
That's kind of strange, but the Senate Government Structure Committee advanced it in late of January this month. Um, so the full Senate vote is coming up soon, possibly. Um, Current Mississippi open meeting laws require public access, but do not mandate online streaming. Leading to limited participation. Because I mean, let's face it, you put it online, you put it live. That's where most people can watch it and see it.
Yeah.
That's where more people are going to have access to it. Senator McCann said that it's only right to open the doors to public meetings. Senator Boyd said it enables anyone to watch live online, no matter where they live. So, some of the potential challenges are the cost and setup for small towns. It's not going to be that much. I mean, let's face
No.
it. If we can find a budget for some of these other things, they can find a budget to buy. I mean, we're doing it on our phones. Like, let's
Yeah.
face it. I mean, they can figure this out. Technical issues. They're always going to try to say that there's something. Look, if we're finding a way, they can find a way.
Yeah.
Um, but how is this tied to some principles of government transparency, accountability, justice? I like this light over darkness because it truly is. When I've heard somebody say this, like sunshine is a heck of an exposure. It creates some truth and openness to what's going on in these meetings. It allows a little more fairness because it requires them to do what's right and more acceptable. So requiring these meetings kind of ensures decisions affecting citizens are made more justly with opportunity for oversight and input. Um, the stewardship and accountability factor. These are leaders that are stewards of public trust.
Hmm.
So if they feel like they can't discuss this stuff openly, if they don't think that they're held accountable to the decisions that they're making by the people that elected them, there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
I think in any kind of, you know, I just can't think of an instance where it's like if I want to be a public official, but I just, can't let the public know about this or we can't tell
Hmm.
the people about this. Like there's something immediately wrong there.
Yeah.
Um, you kind of made that decision to say, you're not going to make everybody happy. I get that, but you're not there to make everybody happy. You're there
Yeah.
to represent a group of people, a majority, and to have the community involved in these decisions because you're representing them. So, this involves the people's voice. Assemblies in the Old Testament were big on, getting the people involved. So modern streaming just kind of empowers everyday citizens, especially, the marginalized or the distant to engage, reflecting the value of, the decision making in the community as opposed to just, hey, we elected you and you can go off and make these decisions without us, or and then all of a sudden next thing we know it's a bill and then we're having to conform to it. So ultimately, while government again isn't the church, people's principles like light, justice, and servant leadership, I think kind of apply universally to this, and it could be a practical step towards doing these things more humbly and in civic life for some of these elected officials. So we encourage people to kind of follow the progress of this bill, contact your representatives, and pray for transparency because this is something that if live streaming does go far enough, it should provide that accountability. What do you
Mhm.
think about it?
100%. I mean, to me, it's sort of like the Sharia law thing that they're going to get into here in the next couple of weeks. It's like, why is this a thing we're having to do? Why isn't this already mandated? Where if you're going to have a public meeting that's going to be available to the public to come to, why can't we live stream it out for the masses? Because people have work during the day; they can't just go to the Capitol every single day and see what people are talking about. They need to be able to watch this stuff whenever they can. And it also, like you said, it creates another level of accountability for these people running for office because a lot of them get in there and then they make all these backdoor deals or whatever, and they don't reap the consequences of it because no one knows about it, right? This changes that, and I think if this isn't a unanimous vote, we as the conservative coalition and we as conservatives in general need to make sure that every single person that votes against this that has an R next to their name does not get reelected in 2027.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think if you have anything to hide, then you know something's wrong there. Which kind of leads us into our next topic, the ballot initiative and the restoration bill in the Mississippi legislature right now. SC 518, empowering Mississippians with direct democracy. So this refers to the Senate concurrent resolution, likely building on prior versions from earlier sessions. It's kind of aimed at amending the Mississippi Constitution back to restore the ballot initiative process. So Mississippi's initiative process was struck down in 2021 due to an outdated signature requirement tied to 5 congressional districts, and that state now has 4 congressional districts. So for the fifth straight year, it's being debated about restoring this. Key sponsors include Chairman Price Wallace, and then Senate Elections Chairman Jeremy England. So this bill would amend sections of the Constitution and propose new laws to repeal or amend existing laws, place measures directly on the ballot for voter approval, independent of the legislator, require higher signature thresholds, um, 200,000 signatures to address past concerns about abuse of maybe not requiring enough, and also include some safeguards like single subject rules as opposed to bundling all these things into one and trying to get signatures for that kind of I guess you can compare that to the school choice bill.
Yeah.
So making it very single lined, plain and clear. um, and then also disclosure of funding, especially from out of state, and some of the potential restrictions include no initiatives on abortion, PERS, and constitutional amendments in some of the drafts. So, if passed by both chambers with supermajorities as a constitutional amendment, it goes to voter ratification, potentially on the 2026 ballot. Past efforts failed due to disagreements between the House and Senate. Again, uh, some of the proponents argue it gives citizens a check when it comes to legislative stalls on issues like education funding, term limits, other reforms. We talked about closing primaries the other
Yeah.
day. Um, but like we said, it restores some citizen-led lawmaking. Mississippians could gather signatures to force votes on policies the legislator ignores or just simply blocks, and it also maybe balances the power a little bit. Um, Creates these higher hurdles to prevent these frivolous measures on laws, and it also focuses on government by the people without undermining or representative democracy, if you will. um, this also addresses the 2021 ruling, fixes some of the technical flaws while also modernizing the district requirements. Some of the points here that supporters are seeing it as an accountability measure as well.
Hmm.
And then some people worry that out of state money and radical changes by bypassing the process could also happen.
Yeah.
Um, so, from a conservative Christian, viewpoint, this is restoring direct citizen input. It aligns with scriptural emphasis on self governance and accountability, and resisting centralized power and putting a little bit more power, back in the people's hands. Um, Government by consent, in the people's voice. Romans 13 recognizes authorities as God ordained, but also implies accountable rule. So when leaders fail to act justly, mechanisms for the people, like the ballot initiative, are there to correct course, reflect the idea of governance, where the governed participant um, doesn't reflect what the people want. Um, Justice and no oppression by rulers. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. So the ballot initiative provides a peaceful remedy when lawmakers and kind of entrench themselves in bad policy or ignore the moral issues. It also prevents elite monopolies on lawmaking. So a lot of different things here that this could be. I mean, not could be. I think it's just a great thing that we need to
Hmm.
bring back. And the reason I think it was taken away is just because people were paying a lot of attention and decide, you know what, we can go get 150,000 votes pretty easily.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the old threshold was. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's great, because you sort of run into some problems whenever you got half the state voting for one thing, and then a few legislators can block it. So I think it'll work out. And I think there's some important things that can get done, because of that. And then especially with the whole, I know the state has had some issues before, specifically with like Madison County doing some lawsuits where, because we used to have 5 congressional districts, now we have four, that it creates some weird loopholes to get over some stuff like this. So I think it'll ultimately be a good thing.
I agree. Another form of putting some power back in the people's hands, and not just with these officials. Right now, especially with school choice, I mean, there's a lot going on where you trust these people 9/10 out of the year, and then there's just one time where you don't.
Yeah.
This is a great time where it's like, why don't we put this school choice initiative? If they say 70 to 80% of Mississippians are for school choice, but there's so much out there that are saying they're opposed to it. Well, let's let the people decide. Let's see what they think about it.
Right.
And what's wrong with that? I guess somebody would say, well, they don't know any better. The people don't know what's right for their kids, or they don't know about school choice. But the ones that are opposed to it are actually, saying, well, the lawmakers don't know about education.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a catch 22, I think. Um, Another good one that is out there right now is the Mississippi campaign and finance reform bills introduced this session and referred to the Senate Elections Committee. 2558 and 2589 kind of represent targeted campaign finance reforms developed in close collaboration with Secretary of State Watson, AG Lynn Finch, uh, Lieutenant Governor Hoseman and some other folks. These companion bills would kind of build on Secretary Watson's top priority. I know he posted something the other day, and he's pretty stoked about this. He's been about this for a long time because we all know that there is some money that gets thrown in there from whether it's out of
Yeah.
state. We just want to know where it's coming from. So, and then also, I think Mississippi campaign finance reform needs to happen because we just saw it. I have it in my notes. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but what just happened in Jackson with former Mayor Lumumba and Jody Owens and that whole thing. Now they're
Mhm.
trying to argue it. Where they're basically just trying to put it on the law enforcement.
Yeah.
Had we had these stricter campaign finance reform rules, you might, it's going to prevent these people, from even entertaining the fact of trying to do these corrupt things and, using this money for or taking bribes, um, for whatever, for votes, for moving legislation, policy. I mean, because let's face it, it's out there. I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
just too much money that comes in. Um, and I think it's just this helps clarify some things. Some of the things that it also helps is it helps to clarify related terms to donations, contributions, expenditures, reporting requirements. I think it put everything online and made them have a bank account to where more things could be tracked.
Hmm.
It strengthened the penalties for violations, and ensuring clear reinforcement for these non-compliant late filings or misreportings, which we see a lot of that. It created a mandate for online filing. Like I said, for the candidates, political committees, PACs, replacing the paper submissions, which is kind of outdated. Um, and then also created, like I said, that searchable online database through the Secretary of State's office where voters could easily search donors, the amounts, the recipients, dates, purposes. And then it's just going to enhance some transparency, enabling us to see where this money's coming from and who the funds for these campaigns and how it's being spent is coming from. You still there?
Yeah, yeah. I've got to do something real quick.
Gotcha. So these reforms aim to modernize an outdated system, like I just said. Um, the new online system is under development now, and it could launch as early as April of 2026 if it's mandated. But again, it focuses on practical improvements to disclosure, accessibility. By requiring these digital filings, it also it's clarifying rules and penalties. Again, just enhancing an old, confusing, non-transparent, weak system that's been in place for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, Again, from a Christian, conservative perspective, this is just integrity, plain and simple. Um, these opaque campaign finance rules invite, deception, hidden dealings, and this isn't stuff that honors the way that money in politics works. Because let's face it, I mean that's where most of these campaigns are won is just these huge amounts of money that come from either PACs. These guys are outspent. Money can basically be spent on, you could spend campaign finance money on just about whatever you
Oh,
want.
yeah.
If it's done in a certain amount of money, like under a certain threshold, you don't even have to report what it's for. So I mean, people are giving this money, Joe down the road is giving money to a campaign thinking it's actually doing something, but same guy that's running is getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars from somewhere else, and they don't care. It just kind of um it doesn't hold any accountability, what they're using these funds for, where it's coming from, who's buying their votes. But these public officials are stewards of this taxpayer money, and it should be transparent. These finances should be transparent. If you're going to be in public office, I mean, you should be prepared for those things to be visible, and to be easily searchable. Because I mean, when that campaign money flows, uh, you know, leaders, like I said, are more likely to serve the people rather than those special interests,
Hmm.
and run a less likelihood of being bought by somebody. What do you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. I think Mississippi has a problem with this. I think we've seen it, especially with some of the way some of these campaigns are ran. It's pretty shady, honestly, from the votes to the money. You sort of wonder where do you get all this money? But I think it absolutely, and it's more accountability for our elected officials because, like you said, you can spend a lot of this campaign money on whatever you want. Really, to be honest, and I think that's half the reason a lot of these people get into this stuff is that it's a way just to line their pockets, whether it's insider trading or getting all, taking advantage of campaign finance laws. I think it introduces another level to make people think about this stuff more. And it makes it where regular people are going to be more likely to run for office and not someone who's just looking out for their own interest.
Oh yeah, I mean they could, it's unbelievable. I mean, when you look at it, just kind of the what could be possible, and then some of these guys sit on these campaign funds year round. I mean, they use this card for dinners, they use it for lunch, they use it for, golf, they use it for this, they use it for that. And like I said, this is money that, somebody, who just really believes in this person, um, is donating to, thinking that it's going to help them, you know, run their campaign to potentially, make votes on their behalf. But like you said, I think some of these folks, they're like, you know what, I can go, and if I can get, some big donors, like you don't have to report what you're spending that money on a lot of the
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
It's just like a whole nother salary, in these campaign finance reforms. I've seen firsthand, some folks that spend some of these campaign monies on these banquets and dinners and parties to sway people and to just, for the sake of having something sponsored by, the campaign of this person or that person. And, they're paying for alcohol, they're paying for,
Hmm.
fancy food, like, and it's just like, how is this actually representing the little old lady or guy down the road that is believing in you? Did you invite them to this party?
Right.
You're just using it because, and it's not even your money, which is sad because they're just like, parading around like it is. I'm not gonna name any names, but I mean, I've seen some stuff firsthand where I was like, this is just, pathetic. Because they use this money, like I said, on these elaborate dinners and
Hmm.
parties, and it's just it's a
Yeah.
shame.
100%.
Um, Next thing on the agenda, SB 2588, which is a annual citizenship verification for the Mississippi voter rolls, and just kind of how this is helping to safeguard election integrity. It's an annual cross check of voter rolls against federal database to confirm U.S. citizenship. Um, Introduced in the regular session this year, referred to the Senate Elections Committee, requires Secretary of State to run the state's voter registration rolls through federal databases annually, to make sure that all voters are U.S. citizens. This builds on prior Mississippi efforts, um, and a database system that kind of goes off of DPS and driver's license data,
Hmm.
federal save database, and extends verification from initial registration to ongoing maintenance. So it addresses concerns over outdated records, naturalized citizens, rare non-citizen registration slipping through, and it also aligns with national pushes for cleaner voter rolls amid debates and voter integrity. We're gonna need to do that pretty soon, and the sooner the better because we have elections coming up in March.
Yep.
We have midterms coming up. In a couple years, we're gonna have another presidential election. And there is a lot more people in the state, in the country, And this may be where the conversation gets a little bit uncomfortable, but I was saying this, years ago, was like we are literally importing a whole nother group of voters,
Yeah.
by the previous administration. And I mean, it's just, I mean, it was obvious, like, if we, well, for whatever side you're on, let's face it, now that they're coming out with how much voter fraud, especially like out of Georgia came out with,
Mhm.
these made up ballots and things like that, whether it was the computer systems that were not calibrating right, or doing fishy things, voting was just stopped, votes were added. I've seen it firsthand where, in the district I live in when I ran for alderman, I mean, things just weren't right. I mean, there was old voters, there were people that didn't live there. There was houses for rent. There was a lot of people registered a house. I mean, I caught some issues with it.
Mhm.
To where really I was like, man, I don't even care if if I win or not. Like, I'm just more concerned with how many issues there are,
Yeah.
and how, like, I'm not saying anybody's cheating, but if somebody wanted to, like, there's plenty of votes here where somebody could pad something,
Heck yeah.
and not many people are going to go back and ask those questions and look. I mean, I had and still have several examples and documentation of things that just weren't right. I'm just kind of keeping my back pocket because I'm like, okay, like, let's see if this ever gets cleaned up. So this is a push to help do that. But a lot of what the bill discusses is, like I said, election integrity focus. It mandates proactive, reoccurring verification to catch those errors, ineligible voters. The use of those federal tools to kind of help clean the system up and clean the rolls up. Um, and like I said, the non-citizens that are here, like, I think luckily, Mississippi, we have a pretty good system, but again, I don't think we have to worry so much about how much, if Mississippi being a conservative Republican state, I don't think we have to worry so much about, the Democrat or um, other side, voting in Mississippi Republican primaries. I think you're going to see
Yeah.
more of like Republican against Republican, and like who the party wants to win, and that's where there's the ability to pad. So
Mhm.
this is actually something that could benefit either side. So if you're seeing a conservative candidate, but it's just not the guy that they want, I mean, there's the ability to still push it. There could be cheating amongst the party, if you will. I'm not saying that that's happening, but I mean, it's there when there's people that are dead, or that don't live at an address anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's possible. So, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, 100%. And like we've said a couple times already, why isn't this a thing? I have no idea. And especially if we can look at what's happening in the federal government with the Save Act, if we think that there's even a chance that that doesn't pass, we as a state need to step up to make sure that there's citizenship verification for every single ballot, or if you want to re-register, whatever. If you don't have election security, you don't have a country really at all. Because at what point do you have just who decides what? Are they really being elected or are they not? So if you don't like, people always say if you don't have border security, you don't have a nation. If you don't have election security, you don't have a nation. And this is something that the state can be a leader on, and I hope they are. But it needs to get done regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I think we say, why isn't it not a thing? I mean, I think it's plain and simple. Why is it not a thing? Because it provides the votes there to pad. And again, who's going to go and ask these questions?
Hmm.
If you ever look at voter rolls, it's kind of a headache to look at, and unless you can pull information from the Secretary of State's office, you can pull it from the local, clerk's office, you can pull it from different voter databases. I did all three plus hit the ground, and was actually building my own data. And I was like, nothing matches. I was like,
Yeah.
nothing matches. There's just so many inconsistencies and things wrong where it's like, it becomes more of a headache to try to figure it out. And, somebody after campaigning for a year or, more, um, and then you lose by, let's 10,000 votes, like, nobody's gonna go look into that. They're gonna be like, you know what? I'm tired. I lost. I'm done. Like, I'm
Yeah.
over it. They're not asking questions. I've seen some of these races where they are very, very slim margins. And I mean, I think you really only got to find like one inconsistency, and then I mean, you don't have to have an inconsistency to challenge it or recount.
Hmm.
You just got to ask for it. But like I said, most people are just so tired by the time they're done with these campaigns that they're like, you know what, whatever. They're not going to ask the questions. But looking at it again from a Christian perspective, it's rule of law. It's submission to authority and teaching that these systems are instituted by God, and this is not just civic authority, but it's allowing non-citizens to vote. Just kind of totally subverts the whole lawful processes of it. And verifying citizenship kind of upholds the design for orderly governance and how this is supposed to run. And not just because it's fair, but I mean that's just like if you want to vote, like you need to become a citizen, like you need to have all the stuff in place. And it's not showing partiality. It's not saying like, oh well, you're trying to um, just reflect one group or one party evenly. Like it's
Hmm.
checks and balances. Also showing a stewardship of the public trust. Again, these officials they're supposed to hold a standard of wanting these roles to be clean to prevent fraud, to prevent dilution that could harm the citizens' voices. Because I mean, when there's the like you said, if you don't have the closed borders, if you don't have the clean rolls, you don't have elections, you don't have a free country. I mean, you
Yeah.
have just a free for all, and you have somebody with tally marks saying, "Oh, let's add 10 here, so that'll help this person win," because it's so they're so inaccurate that it's not protecting the law-abiding citizens from their votes being diluted by the ineligible ones. And that's not safeguarding families. That's not safeguarding the communities. It's not safeguarding the policy decisions that could be made because potentially it's going to elect somebody who doesn't have the interests of that community or those constituents in mind. So it's super dangerous to not have clean rolls. Like I said, I think I think we're fortunate we live in a place where you know we have people in place that do reflect our values and the conservative principles. But that's not to say that there aren't other people that may come along that may do it better. But because they are not willing to go with the status quo or they're not willing to go along to get along. Their campaigns and their ability to run for office can essentially be stifled because
Exactly.
there's the votes to pad the other guy who goes along and gets along, who takes the money, who
Hmm.
votes the way they want it to. So um, this is just for secure, fair elections for all Mississippians. I like Secretary of State Watson and what he's done. I think he's
Yeah.
been a pretty good proponent and all of that for a long time.
Hmm.
And trying to help clean this up. I think they see now more than ever, especially with what's going on across the country, that now is the time to really clean this stuff up because if not, we could have a problem, and not just here, but in other states too, and that's just going to create a bigger issue on the national level. So,
Yeah.
speaking of the national level, kind of back down to the Mississippi level, a post I saw from Auditor Shad White. on kind of the fraud in Minnesota and the fraud that could potentially be going on in Mississippi. The post reads that he's been asked if Mississippi has the same problem that we saw in Minnesota, child care center fraud. His office released one of the first in a series of audits of child care centers getting taxpayer money in Mississippi. Um, while we didn't see anything like the size that we saw in Minnesota, there were some child care centers that have some pretty big problems here, just as they do everywhere else in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these child care nonprofits got millions without having to prove whether kids are actually showing up every day. So, in other words, they were receiving the money whether a child showed up or not. When they asked which kids were signed up for the centers, they found errors like duplicate entries, misspelled names, incorrect addresses, same exact thing as voter rolls. When we asked if the kids were making learning gains, we found the agency handing out the money to not provide reliable measures whether the programs are actually achieving these outcomes. He testified in Congress a while back about some of these programs and how it just becomes a problem here. So, um, again, this is a report that was highlighting how TANF fund dollars are spent in after school childcare without actually tracking child attendance. So apparently in fiscal year 2024, nearly $11 million went to nonprofits for low income family programs, but lax oversight raised a lot of red flags. And again, we talked about this last time. What does it mean for vulnerable kids and taxpayer accountability? Well, the kids that actually need this are the ones suffering the most, and they're not getting the resources that they need. I was doing a taking some catering to a client the other day, and I passed a building, and it was like Sunshine Learning Center, and it was like just in a sketchy part of
Yeah.
town, and it was I was going to one of the hospitals downtown, but I was like, "There's no way, like this is." And I'm like, I wonder, this is just one of those things where like put a sign up and then nobody ever shows up. It clearly
Mhm.
looked shut down, which hopefully was a good thing. And if they're reporting some fraud, but it's pretty crazy how a lot of this stuff happens and there is no oversight and all that. Um, some of these after school programs that were provided money through nonprofits via the Mississippi Department of Human Services, and they received payments based on offering child care services, but nothing was ever documented for child attendance. And then MDHS did not require collect daily attendance data from the providers. They were just saying, "Hey, we're a nonprofit. We were doing a daycare. Um, you know, give us some money," and they were getting the money, and then there was no questions asked.
Mhm.
Um, Big problem. $11 million in 2024. Shad's concern was risk of similar child care fraud scandals elsewhere, obviously, which we have seen is happening. Stressing the need for stronger oversight and the misuse of these funds because it is obviously happening. And then, the poorest kids that this money is intended to, it's not going to. So,
Yeah.
um, apparently, there's no direct fraud alleged, but the lack of attendance verification creates vulnerability. So, this ties into broader Mississippi TANF fund debates, like we talked about last time. The big welfare scandal, and all the money that got redirected to some big names that we saw. Brett Favre being one, Ted DiBiase, and just kind of the money being spent in other places other than these community groups and organizations that were
Mhm.
intended to help these underprivileged kids. So it's pretty sad that these after school programs aren't filling these critical gaps and helping kids keep kids safe. Post school, and in fact, it's actually it's going to who knows what. And then here we are having the school choice conversation, and it all just kind of ties together in that parents are trying to do what's best. This is supposed to be helping these working parents, provide a safe space for their kids to go to school for after school programs and things like that. And the money's not making it there. It's being stolen pretty much. Um,
Yeah.
but how do we balance this? How do we help support this? I think there's way too many groups that are exploiting this money, and I think it's just a poor lack of oversight from MDHS and what they're doing to make sure this money makes it to the right places. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a problem in every state, and the fact that it's this significant in Mississippi, I think, is alarming. Because Mississippi is not a big state, and it's especially I wouldn't consider it a big state for childcare industries. Mississippi's poverty rate would make that just unattainable to be a huge industry in the state. Um, but if we can find like tens of millions of dollars in this fraud here in Mississippi, my mind immediately goes to, well, what's a state like New York look like? What's a state like California look like, or even like a Washington or an Oregon or a New Mexico, Colorado? What do those states look like if Mississippi looks like this, where you can still find tens of millions of dollars of fraud? And we were talking about earlier how you might have to shift the budget around for some of these things, whether it be school choice, the homeschooling, or the live streaming. Let's get that money from here. So instead of, taxpayer dollars being wasted in fraud, it goes to something really cool like empowering parents or making sure that everyone can watch the Senate committee hearings or whatever it be that the government has. So I think the problem that we have in Mississippi, and this goes not only for fraud, but also goes for a lot of the election issues we have in the state, is that Lynn Finch just fails to prosecute any of it. And if you fail to prosecute of it, all the investigations don't mean a thing, and you just wasted money on them. So that's why 2027 is such a big year because we can finally get a reset on some of this stuff, where someone might actually go in and prosecute something. So that's what needs to happen. But I think these investigations are great. They need to keep happening so that we can get the spotlight on it and hopefully some things change.
Yeah, this audit and this work that's being done, it's a pursuit for better accountability by Auditor Shad White. It's great work that's being done. I commend him for that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, when nobody's being prosecuted, when nobody's being held accountable, these groups and these people see that, oh well, we can get away with it, so why not? They're not going to do anything. A
Yeah.
lot of these groups get this money, they turn around and whether they have organization and they're giving money somewhere else. The money I think just kind of flows in circles. It's like, well, we know that they're getting money and they're not using it the right way, but then they
Hmm.
funnel it to a pack, and then the pack maybe funnels it back to a campaign, and then the campaign it's used by that guy. He
Hmm.
knows the money's going back to that nonprofit, and it's just a circle of,
Yep.
you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And in the midst of it, people are in these positions of these nonprofits, collecting a huge salary, having these dinners, just living a whole nother lifestyle. And like I said, potentially helping fund some of these campaigns for these folks who are just not providing any kind of oversight or turning the cheek and looking the other way, because it's just the money's flowing in a circle. So
Yep.
hopefully it's this is going to come up with more. Like I said, I appreciate the auditor's office and what they've been doing and exposing some of this stuff. It really is refreshing to see that. It sucks because it's like, man, like, how many people are actually involved in it that, and I think a lot more. So between all these bills and between a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, it's like there's a really good opportunity, like you said, this year and next year to provide some accountability and hopefully make some of these people think twice before running for office, to think this is just another salary for me or another way to expand my lifestyle.
Hmm.
Honestly, I was like, you know, should they be getting paid for this? Like,
Yeah.
should it just be a public service? Like, if you want to run for office, like, run for office, and no money attached to it. And there's just open debates, maybe that are live streamed and then people are able to vote on it and that's it. But instead there's these mudslinging contests, and then there's money spent on signs, there's money spent on commercials, there's money spent on, push cars. There's so much money that flows through these things. And, again, it's like, well, that's my cousin's,
Yeah.
sign business and my cousin's sign business that you paid me 10 grand to get print signs. So I'm gonna turn around and donate 5 grand back to your campaign, and then you're gonna turn around and spend 3 grand back with me, and it's just a circle.
Yeah.
Same thing that we talked about last week with the superintendents, and just like, them providing services to another school district or to an organization that the superintendent had. It's just, it's a matter of time before it's all shined a light.
Yeah.
Super sad stuff. All right, so we'll shift a little bit. We'll kind of start to wrap it up. One of the last couple things we're going to talk about is some national level news. President Trump's called in sanctuary cities. So effective February 1st, President Trump said they're not making any payments to sanctuary cities or states, um, because they do everything possible to protect criminals and at the expense of American citizens. So this kind of builds on executive actions from the DOJ and DHS to identify non cooperative jurisdictions, those limiting ICE access to jails or refusing detainers for criminal illegal immigrants. Um, Obviously, there's been some tensions, including incidents in Minneapolis. How, Trump kind of escalated by publicly calling on Congress to pass legislation to abolish these sanctuary policies. He issued for demands for local cooperation from these cities that were just turning over criminal illegal aliens
Mhm.
in custody and assisting and not assisting federal detention. So, um, sanctuary jurisdictions, they limit local and federal immigration cooperation because they're often being more compassionate towards these criminals.
Mhm.
Critics argue that, this shields these criminals from ever being prosecuted. It helps a breeding ground for fraud and crime, like we're seeing in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It's not prioritizing citizens; it's prioritizing, essentially terrorists a lot of the times too. So his push is kind of from a first term efforts that were blocked by courts. But again, it's aiming to enforce federal immigration laws, ties to funding and compliance from these cities. Um, and also, it's just to cut the funding. If you're obviously getting this money, turning around and giving it to uh, these illegals that are committing fraud. I mean, like, it's pretty cut and dry. I don't understand why this is such a big issue,
Yeah.
except for the ones that know that they're doing something wrong and don't want the flow to stop.
I completely agree. I mean, we keep going through this again and again where it's like, why is this a thing that we actually have to get done? Um, it's bigger than just a lot of people. They like to make the claim, "Look, you're just not compassionate enough." These poor people that are just trying to come. But no, illegal immigration is far more than just people crossing the border looking for better lives. First off, I think they can do that in their own countries. It's not America's burden to do that. Secondly, the cartels make hundreds of billions of dollars off of trafficking people across our southern border and getting them to the southern border from, through Mexico or whatever. So the more and more that you encourage illegal immigration, the more money you're making the cartels. And the more that you encourage illegal immigration, that draws Border Patrol and ICE away from preventing drugs from getting into the country. So you're making them more money that way, and you're killing Americans in the process, let alone the hundreds of Americans that are killed every year by illegal immigrants, and let alone the thousands that are raped, assaulted, or maimed by illegals as well. So it's bigger than just people looking for better lives. And what it does in these sanctuary cities in particular is it jacks up housing prices and it jacks up prices in general because the more people you have, the more things cost. And it makes life even more affordable in these big blue cities.
Yeah, it is. And I feel bad for, the people that are really misled by, um, the politicians that are, that are saying, this is not being compassionate towards people that are here honestly trying to make a better life. And then there are
Mm.
some that are here, doing it the right way that
Yeah.
unfortunately are dealing with the, you know, consequences of these guys and, groups that are taking this money and funding, whether it's terrorists or the cartels or fraud. I mean, it's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And, thankfully, I was looking at this today. It wasn't ICE, for instance, that just came into Minneapolis for no reason. This isn't like a redemption tour of ICE to come in and like turn
Hmm.
things upside down. Like, yeah, like the FBI, DHS, like they came in because there is fraud. Like there is a
Yeah.
bunch of bad stuff happening. Well, when you come in, you find out that this is a bunch of bad stuff happening. And just so happens to be that these people are illegal immigrants, rapists, murderers, drug dealers. Like that's going to require ICE to come in too. And
Yeah.
they just so happen to be the ones that don't mind, putting the rubber on the road and actually getting stuff done. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be unfortunately, there's going to be some things that happen that turn the wrong way. I mean, we saw that recently.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's sad that that it turns into that. But I think that's where these rioters and that's where a lot of these people really make their push is like, okay, like let's just turn this into a big thing and let's get everybody thinking that we're being treated unfairly,
Hmm.
um by the push of to end these sanctuary cities. Let's make it look like this is just something that is against common people when it's actually like this is against drug dealers, this is against criminals, this is against people committing fraud. I mean, it's sad. And then you see things like, the shooting, Renee Good, they were out there uh protesting, doing whatever they were doing, shoot.
I wouldn't even call it protesting, Chris. I would call it domestic terrorism. I mean, what we've seen with Signalgate and all this stuff is that this is coordinated efforts to impede ICE officers from getting rapists, murderers, and pedophiles off of our streets. And there's nothing natural about this. These are people that are in coordination with local governments in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and coordination with one another, illegally scanning license plates to dox ICE agents and to know where they're at. And these people are getting themselves killed because of the rhetoric of Tim Walz and Jacob Frey and the police chief up there that demonizes ICE as the Gestapo and sort of just terrorists that are spread across America. When in reality, they're taking dangerous criminals off of our streets and making our communities safer. Yet we have the rhetoric from Tim Walz and all them that emboldens people like Renee Good and Alex Ferretti to get involved in altercations with law enforcement that winds up getting themselves killed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do agree with you there. I mean, it just gets these folks involved. And, man, I think you know, there's a way and there's a time and there's a place, but I just haven't seen an example where it's like, what did you expect? Like, what did you expect if you're out there? I saw something earlier. If there's, it's, it's not funny, but I mean, somebody was arguing there, like, well, if there's nine people that sit at a table with a Nazi, then there's, now there's 10 Nazis,
Yeah.
and then the guy said in return, like, well, if there's nine people throwing, rocks at the police to defend a terrorist, well, then there's 10 terrorists. Like, if you're out there in coordination with these folks and you don't know what you're getting into, like, you probably don't need to be there. And I think it's just, folks get super, like, I want to say confused or brainwashed, or it's just like, what did you expect to be out? I mean, like, I can't
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
of many reasons why I would be out with a loaded weapon or with my vehicle. interfering with police, federal or local investigations and what they're doing. Like,
And then resisting
why?
arrest on top of it. Like, let's not get it confused. Alex Peretti was killed because he decided to resist arrest and failed to inform law enforcement that he had a firearm on him. And this is a misconception that I've seen across social media. I've seen it at school. I, just talking with people is that just because obviously just because they have a firearm does not mean you have violated a crime. That doesn't mean you should be killed. Here's the difference. Alex Peretti purposely got into an altercation with law enforcement, assaulted law enforcement, and then decided to violently resist arrest and conceal a firearm and try to prevent law enforcement from obtaining his firearm. Law enforcement officers in any of those situations are likely going to use deadly force whenever they discover that you have a gun. Because if you're trying to stop them from getting the gun, why do you try? Why are you trying to get the gun while you're resisting arrest? And another thing is these law enforcement officials, they have to make these decisions in milliseconds. So if we're going to sit here and play Monday morning quarterback with these law enforcement officials now that we have 2020 hindsight vision, no, I don't think that's okay. These people are out in our streets every single day, and the only reason that they're there is because Tim Walz and Jacob Frey have created a safe haven for criminals who have raped, looted, and plundered off the American people for the longest time. And ICE and Border Patrol is trying to fix that error that's plagued this country for the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bigger picture. I mean, they're, they're out there trying to secure the borders, but they're trying to secure the borders from deep inside the borders, preserving the economies of these cities, reducing the burdens on these welfare and healthcare systems. Like, nobody's really looking at it that way. Like, we're looking at it, I think too much from a humanitarian point of, this isn't, fair, this isn't right, but it's like you're
It's
not
not fair.
really
It's not fair and
understanding
right to
it.
the American people that they should be burdened to subject 10 million illegal immigrants in the last 4 years. It raises the prices of
Yeah.
homes. It makes the American dream unattainable for Americans and illegal immigrants, and it offsets all of the price offsets onto Americans, whether it be welfare or college or houses. It makes life unattainable and it makes it unaffordable, and that's a large reason you've seen affordability to be the number one issue for the last 5 years or so for the American people. Is because you have imported 10 million people who are not supposed to be here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, without these actions, like, it's a lot of unchecked illegal immigration. It's eroding public trust. Like you said, it inflates not only the crime, but the markets, and just really weakens the whole fabric of a nation in general. And it starts in these bigger cities, and it can spread to these suburban areas. But I mean, their efforts, like you said, ICE is trying to ensure the safety of law-abiding citizens, and not these illegals that are coming in and committing these crimes, and unfortunately getting American citizens involved in it. And it's pretty sad, that we're, and I think, if anything, man, honestly, like, that's kind of who I hope, we're reaching as well, because I have some friends, I'll say, I mean, people I consider friends that are just like, this is just wrong. An innocent man was killed, and I'm just like, what, why would you go and do that? Like, would you go and
Mhm.
put yourself in those positions and in that situation to, and then what are you actually defending, and what are you actually trying to prove here? Like, this is, these are law enforcement federal agencies that are trying to protect your rights, that are trying to protect your cities from, I mean, I was looking at a list earlier of just people from all over the world that had, everything from DUIs to kidnapping
Mhm.
to prostituting minors to just all kind of stuff. And it's like, these are the people they're pulling off the street that are mixed in with these other ones, and they're just like, you don't know who these folks are,
Yeah.
and you're trying to defend that. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me that, why aren't you concerned with your brothers, your sisters, your family, your communities, your localities? Like, you should be doing something more local, and I guess they're doing something local, or they think they are on that level. But what they're doing is putting themselves in harm's way. They're actually creating more drama. And then what these people want, what these groups want is they want these moments. They want
Mhm.
this stuff to happen because it's gonna stir up these folks that are lost. It's gonna and that's what I call it, man. I'm just gonna they're lost. You know, they're looking for something to be a part of. They want to be a part of a movement. They want to say that they're defending people by being out there. Like you know, you're not. Like defend your
Mhm.
families, defend your communities in a way where you're engaging a system civically, not out there with a loaded firearm
And
getting tangled up with cops.
that's exactly what Antifa looks for. Antifa is exactly similar to multiple terrorist organizations across the world. Al Qaeda, ISIS, they're all looking for those lone wolf types who are going to go out there and commit some heinous crime that gets them in the news. Antifa is the exact same way. They want all of these isolated people. That is why Antifa's doctrine, and that is why the doctrine and the ideology of the left is so centered on the self. They make you so obsessed with yourself that you can't live up to your own standard that you believe society has set upon you, whether it be in the LGBTQ community, anti religion, education, all of this stuff. It's designed to drag the self down so that they get isolated and turn to radical ideologies like socialism, like fascism, all of this stuff. That's what the left prays for. And that's what they work towards. And that's why you've seen people get themselves killed committing these heinous crimes.
Yeah, it is sad, man. And I pray for those people all the time. They're just like, you know what? It's just there's got to be a better way. Um, and I think as we wrap up and we kind of pull everything together, we need to look at the bigger picture of these conversations that really matter so deeply right now. It's just like these are most of the time American citizens are getting tied up in this stuff. I mean, while they're arresting these, criminals, these from other countries that have spilled into our country, you're seeing American citizens, the ones that, we're all supposed to be united, that are actually getting tied up in the fight, protecting these people. And it's sad. Um, so, we'll kind of start to wrap it up. While we covered a pretty wide scope today, from the People's Act to more student choice stuff, how to empower parents. Shad White's work on finding some lax oversight in the TANF funds here in Mississippi, as well as the work he's done testifying to Congress, helping to work on our voter rolls, campaign finance reform, reining in some of this bureaucratic power, broader calls for election integrity. It all it's all tied together. If we don't have a system that works and a system where these government and elected officials are held accountable and pushing for laws that are going to benefit, the people, American citizens, we're just leaving it wide open to anybody. And then we don't become a nation of laws anymore. We just become a nation
Mhm.
of whatever. And, you know, I think there's with Trump's, push in sanctuary cities. I mean, from local to federal, like there is a clear understanding that we have to prioritize citizen safety, by not just the immigration laws, but by our the way we vote, the way our elections work, the way our funding is pushed to these organizations that are using these funds. I mean, it's it's an internal divide that you're seeing. It's almost like it's not war, but I mean it's an internal, psychological thing, like you were saying earlier, where it's getting um you know our own people involved in these things that they don't really even know what they're involved in. It's
Yeah.
part of the surge that we've seen, with the shootings, and with the lack of oversight, and it's all at a human cost that is pretty sad. The scope here is pretty big, and like I said, it spans local Mississippi policies, to national stuff, our borders, safety, justice. I mean, these issues don't, they affect everybody. They affect every taxpayer, every family, every kid, every community. How these resources are being used, how power isn't being held accountable. Vulnerable people aren't being protected, kids aren't being protected,
Mhm.
communities are being put at risk. All these laws that are, excuse me, it's supposed to serve the common good, just are being taken advantage of. And thankfully, we see, I think looking at it from a local level and a federal level, like we see this happening on a federal level. We live in a state where we're seeing this on a local level. It's like, well, this isn't just a bigger picture problem. Like, this is a local problem. And if more people in these other states, local elected officials, were seeing the same thing, like, we don't see those kind of issues here. And I think because again, we live in a place where thankfully most of our folks hold those same values, and they understand that, we have to push these policies, and, you can't hide from these hard truths, and they're starting to be exposed more. Unfortunately, in these bigger cities, more bad things happen because these things become more visible. But the more I think that we talk about them and the more that we try to align them to truth, hopefully, my prayer is that the people that feel disconnected from something can get, involved in something that is good, as opposed to, whether it's groups or organizations, or fighting for something that really doesn't matter. Seeking peace for your community as opposed to seeking peace for people that have come in to, you know, change your community and change your America, because that's ultimately what they're trying to do. And this isn't just to, coerce or divide or demonize anybody. The aim here is to unite American citizens in our community. We are a people of shared values. We are the greatest country in the world.
Mhm.
We should be loving our neighbor, and we should be making wise use of what God has provided us in the elections and in our resources. But I think by showing a biblical alignment or misalignment in these real world issues, from the open government and family education choice to accountable spending and the secure elections, like we were saying, and even lawful enforcement of all of these things. That's what it is. It's like, well, there's these problems, and then whenever we're trying to lawfully enforce them, it's like, well, there's criminals that don't want to be held accountable. There's criminals, whether they're in suits or whether they're in gangs or whether they're in the cartel, that don't want to be enforced. We have to foster this understanding that, we have to highlight these things, and we have to talk about them, because if not, people are just going to continue to get tied up in stuff. They're not going to be trusting their institutions. They're not going to be trusting their own families. They're not going to be trusting their own neighbors. They're not going to be trying to protect the kids and the needy and the people that actually need help. But again, the hope is that we're building some bridges here, and it's a hard truth. Like I said, it gets a little uncomfortable to talk about, because people don't want to talk about it. But I think the more we can have that conversation, and invite people to listen and have that conversation back, like, it's pretty plain and clear. Like, this is stuff. Um, it's supposed to be faith informed dialogue, not just walls of anger. Like this. These are things that are aligned with biblical truths. Safe borders, safe communities. Um, you know, Beyond legislation or politics, the ultimate hope, I think, is to lead people to follow Jesus, and his plan for the world, his plan for the United States. In every policy or debate, I think, whether it's, these Mississippi bills or empowering families, I think it's our goal is to reflect his kingdom, and these values publicly, because that's my hope anyways,
Mhm.
is to live this stuff out, and to have people understand that, we are individuals that need transforming. Our families need it, our societies need it, and especially right now.
Mhm.
So hopefully we'll keep pressing forward, with tracking these bills and this legislation, and staying informed on the national developments, and all we can do is pray for wisdom for our leaders, in Jackson and Washington, to engage respectfully, and hopefully, people will share this. So,
Yeah.
beyond our conversations, we're actually seeking the kingdom and then understanding that this is why we should be involved and this is why we should be talking about it. It's not just like, look, this was right or this was wrong. It's like, this is why it's right and this is why it's wrong. And hopefully people will start to understand that a little bit more. We can also hopefully all follow a little bit more faithfully in these turbulent times, because it is definitely some turbulent times out there. But I do feel like more of this truth is being exposed. And, I just pray that, the next generation of people, because we are seeing more of that younger generation and demographic that is just like you said, that is lost and looking for something to get involved in, and they aren't able to find it, so they end up turning to these radical ideas of something that sustains themselves as opposed to trying to sustain others in a fruitful way, and that's where we're failing. So anything you want to add?
No, I think that's good. I think we've had a good show. I keep doing it every week, and I think we're going to grow. And Lord willing, we will. I think it's been a great. We had talked about a lot of great stuff, and can't wait to see where things go.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you and everything you're doing. And like I said, we'll keep tracking everything because there's so much going on. Everything that is, if you're on social media, so much happening daily. And, um, every seems like every time we turn the corner, there's something else. But, you know, we're gonna keep on keeping on, and hopefully there's some more accountability that we see coming. But it's not going to come without some fight. But hopefully it's a good fight. So
Yeah.
we'll end it there, man. Thanks for joining us again. I'm Chris.
Thank
This
you.
is Blake. God bless everyone out there. God bless Mississippi. God bless the United States. Until next time, y'all, keep the faith, stay engaged, be the light. See you next time.
Y'all have a good one.